Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the organicmancoffeetrike.shop. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Arturo, the guy who conned me into doing this podcast about 5 years ago, is working as a truck driver now. He runs all over the country, and I'm hoping he'll send me some cool stories for my next book. Keep your eyes open and listen for stories in those truck stops. Years ago, before joining the fire department or the border patrol, I worked for a trucking company. We hauled oil field equipment all over Texas. I learned a lot during those years. Excuse me. No, during those years I spent on the road. I learned to sleep sitting up. We had trucks with huge winches mounted just behind the cab to load and unload massive things like mud pumps and generators used for oil drilling. There were no sleepers. I learned how to go several days without sleep while we loaded and unloaded drill pipe. If a rig was changing from one size pipe to another, we would bring the new pipe to the rig, unload it, load the old pipe, and haul it off. There could be as many as 10 or 12 trucks all needing attention. The best thing I learned was how to hold on for dear life. I was unhooking a cable wrapped around several heavy drill pipe when the pipe rack collapsed from under me. I went from a bent-over position to hanging on by one hand in less than a second. I was about 10 feet off the ground with all the drill pipe looking like spaghetti underneath me. That would have hurt. Another time, we're picking up a few last items from a rig that had pulled out. It was around midnight, and I was going to hook up an oil tank sitting in the mud. I pulled the cable hooked to an A-frame and walked it over to the tank when the ground under me vanished. I had stepped into a 90-foot hole. Had I not hung on, I would have dropped all the way to the bottom. The guy driving the truck saw me disappear in the work lights, so he slammed on the brakes. The hole was only 2 feet across. It was used to set oil pipe in. A crew was on their way to fill the hole, but we'd gotten there before them. During my time on the road, I never saw anything too weird. There are some people out there who like to show parts of their bodies to truck drivers. After 2 years, I decided to get a less dangerous job, and I joined the fire department. For a year or so after retiring, I drove for one of those rideshare companies. I had a lot of truck drivers as customers. If you were in Laredo and you called for a ride and a green Honda pickup came to pick you up, it was probably me. Some drivers have seen some things nobody can explain. Here are some stories I have either heard from truck drivers or I read on the internet. I met drivers from all walks of life in all parts of the world. I picked up 2 guys who were from Africa. They lived in the U.S. now, but both traveled back and forth to Africa on occasion. A driver was working at what is known as a meet and turn. A truck driver would drive halfway to the truck's destination. A second truck going the other direction would be waiting at a yard. The two drivers would switch trucks and each drive back the way they had come. This allowed them both to be back home at the end of each shift. One driver had arrived at the yard an hour ahead of time, and he decided to catch a quick nap. He rolled down the windows and shut off the engine. After being asleep for a few minutes, the sound of a barking dog drew his attention. Dogs are attracted to truck yards. Truckers will feed them and give them a place to sleep in exchange for keeping an eye on the yard. The driver tried to ignore the barking, but he noticed it was getting closer to his truck. The dog barking was now right outside his window. He turned and looked. There was no dog barking at him. Instead, there was a huge man dressed in raggedy old clothes, barking like a dog. The driver looked at the man, wondering if he was seeing things. The man was barking just like a dog, and he was getting closer and closer to the truck. The guy looked deranged. The driver quickly rolled up the window, started the engine, and drove out of the yard. The barking man began running after him all the way to the highway. The truck driver waited on the road for the other truck to arrive, and then he followed it into the yard. The barking man was gone. The truck driver never saw him again and never heard of anybody else having seen this weird character. A team of drivers were going from San Francisco to Cheyenne, Wyoming. Team drivers consist of two people. One sleeps while the other drives. This allows the load to arrive twice as fast. A truck driver can only work so many hours a day and so many days a month. Team drivers also make it so the driver isn't all alone in the middle of no place. As a truck was cruising along, the driver heard a sound coming from somewhere underneath. It sounded as if something was stuck up under the frame and dragging on the pavement. The driver saw there was a rest area ahead, and he pulled in to see what was making the noise. As soon as the truck engine stopped, the other driver woke up wondering what was going on. The first driver told him what he was hearing, and they both got out to see if anything was wrong. They looked under the truck. They looked inside the engine compartment. In the quiet of the night, the sound of a small child crying came to them. Looking around, the two tracked the sound over to the bathrooms. The sound was coming from the women's side. No one was in the rest area, so the two opened the door and looked inside. The sound was coming from over by the stalls. Trying to sound not threatening, the two truck drivers tried to coax the young kid to come out. Not getting a response, the two moved closer to the stalls, and then they looked into each one. There was no one there. But the crying was still heard. There was a window mounted on the wall, so one of the drivers opened the window, thinking maybe the kid was just outside. As soon as the window was opened, the crying stopped. It was as quiet as a tomb. Looking out the window, there was nobody there either. The two truck drivers were mystified. They stepped to the middle of the room and kind of looked around. The window suddenly slammed shut, followed by the sound of crying beginning once more. This was just too much to handle, so the drivers ran for their truck. As they pulled away, they could still hear the sound of something grinding or dragging underneath the truck. This sound stayed with them until the next day when they pulled into a mechanic's shop and asked for a quick look. The mechanic found a piece of metal wedged up under the engine. Pulling it out, it looked like a piece from a kid's bicycle. The scraping sound had started out on the highway in the middle of nowhere. How a piece of bicycle got wedged under the engine was a mystery. Why the sound of a child crying was coming from an empty building was a bigger mystery. The two never found out why it had happened or if it was connected to some child who had gone missing. A truck driver was just coming off a long weekend, 4 days off. He was ready to get going once more. His company was sending him to Laredo to drop off a trailer to be filled with products coming out of Mexico. He left Dallas late in the night and was coming into Laredo at about 4 a.m. His exit came up just north of town, so he left I-35 and began following a 2-lane road heading west. Laredo is in a dry climate. We mostly have mesquite trees and brush. The road he was on wasn't in too bad a shape, but he was still going kind of slow since he wasn't familiar with his destination. Up ahead, there was some kind of a big dog or maybe a coyote eating something dead right on the edge of the road. As the truck got closer, the headlights showed more detail. The driver could see this was one huge animal. It was at least 4 or 5 feet tall, and it was still hunched over its meal. The creature looked up. Its eyes glowed yellow in the truck's lights. The driver pulled to the left side to give this animal plenty of room. It felt wrong to get too close to this thing. The driver couldn't say why, but the creature felt dangerous. As the truck was about to pass, the beast stood up. It was now on 2 legs. The body looked more like it belonged to a man with a wolf's head. The entire body was covered in coarse, dark hair. As the truck passed the thing, its head was visible in the passenger's window. The window is 6 feet off the ground. The thing must have stood 7.5 to 8 feet tall. The driver kept an eye on the beast as he went by. It was illuminated by the amber lights on the side of the cab. Once the truck was well past the creature, it was still standing there watching the truck. The driver kept looking back to be sure the creature wasn't following him, even though the truck was going 40 miles an hour. The driver got to the yard and pulled in. He dropped the trailer and was driving back along the same road. He watched carefully to see if the thing was still there. The dead animal was gone as well. The driver was all the way to I-35 before he began to relax. A truck driver was finished for the week and was heading home. He'd dropped the trailer and was driving just the tractor to his house at about 3 o'clock in the morning. Not pulling a trailer, the driver was able to take a shortcut to his house. It was a winding 2-lane road lined with trees running through the country. As he went along, the trees and the brush on the sides began to take on an uncomfortable feel. The radio station suddenly cut out and was replaced by static. Hoping this would self-correct, the driver tried to ignore the sound and get to a place where the interference would go away. There was something hanging from a branch right on the side of the road. As he got closer, the driver could see it was a body. Someone had hung themselves or been killed right there next to the road. The driver slammed on the brakes. He was shaking and he felt ill. The last thing he'd expected was to find a dead body. Now he had to call the sheriff's department and probably wait for a deputy to come. No telling how much paperwork was ahead. The driver stepped out of the cab and walked back to where the body hung. It was gone. He looked back and forth. There was the limb sticking out over the road, minus one dead guy. Thinking this had been some kind of a prank, the driver took just a few seconds to look around to see if he could spot the culprits. There was nobody around. He walked back to the truck and got in. As he was firing it up, he looked in the passenger side mirror. There it was, a dead body hanging from the limb he had just stood under. The driver got going, not wanting to get caught up in some bizarre occurrence with no explanation. After this sighting, he says he never takes that road anymore. A driver was taking a load from Detroit to Houston. It had been a long drive, and he was feeling the need for a break. Get something to eat, catch a few winks. Never having driven through this area before, he wasn't familiar with where to find a truck stop or even a restaurant with a big parking lot. After passing Palestine, Arkansas, up ahead he spotted some lights. A truck stop was coming up fast. He signaled and pulled off I-40. Here in Texas, we have a Palestine, Texas. Don't mispronounce it as Palestine, it's Palestine. I don't know how the folks in Arkansas pronounce it, so I'll just go with Palestine. The truck stop looked in need of some work. The parking lot was gravel with weeds growing up here and there. Some of the lights were out, and the ones still working were very dim. Beggars can't be choosers, so he pulled in and parked. The lot was empty. Odd, but then, seeing the condition of the place, maybe other truck drivers had elected to pass and go looking for better accommodations. The restaurant had dirty windows, but the lights were on. In he went to see about some food. The place needed a good cleaning. The food was filling, and he went back to his truck to grab a few winks before heading on down the road. He was jolted from his sleep by the truck rocking back and forth. Either there was a bad earthquake, a really bad storm, or somebody had run into his truck. The driver got out to see what had happened. The night was still. There was no wind blowing. He walked around his rig, trying to see if he had been hit by another driver. As he rounded the side, something about 4 feet tall ducked under the trailer. Turning on his flashlight, he looked under the trailer, but he saw no one. As he walked to the back of the trailer, he saw a young girl standing in the field just beyond the lot. She was only visible for a second before he lost sight of her. He scanned the field, but didn't see her again. Still trying to figure out what had caused his truck to bounce around, the driver kept walking, looking at the trailer and then the tractor once more. As he was reaching up to open the door, the sound of giggling came from the dark right behind him. He spun around, but saw no one. Being all alone in a dark, scary place, the driver said out loud, "This is just too weird." Turning back to the door, he heard a young girl's voice say, "He heard me." It sounded as if it had come from inside his truck. Looking around the cab and then the sleeper, he didn't see anyone. He got into the driver's seat and he turned and looked out the window, and there she was. The young girl was standing about 10 feet from his door, looking right up at him. The eyes looked like those of a predator, dead-looking, like a shark. A feeling of intense fear began to grow inside him. He slammed the door and locked it. He turned the key, wanting to get out of there. The engine fired up, and the air pressure buzzer let him know that he'd have to wait to get going. He glanced at the girl. She hadn't moved. He prayed that the air pressure would come up so he could get out of there. As soon as the pressure was up, allowing the truck to move, he pulled out as fast as the truck would go. The driver kept an eye on the girl, hoping she would just stay put and not chase after him. The last thing he saw of her was her waving goodbye to him. As the truck stop vanished in his rear-view mirror, the driver managed to relax. He was now wide awake, and he didn't feel like sleeping any time in the near future. A truck driver was just outside Sardinia, Ohio. He was cruising along just over the posted speed limit, maybe a mile or two. Suddenly, he saw red flashing lights coming up behind him. Well, the driver began to slow down, hoping the police car would pass him by en route to some more important crime. As the truck slowed down, the lights behind began to slow as well. The driver couldn't see what kind of unit it was. This could be a county vehicle or state. All he could see was a revolving red light. It struck him as being just a bit odd. There was no blue flashing light, just red. There were no blinking lights either. If you look at the light bar on either a state or a county police vehicle, they have red, they have blue, they have revolving, they have flashing, they have all kinds of different lights, but all the driver could see was a revolving red light, like an old style police car. He stopped and got out of the cab, looking for some state official to come up and tell him he was going too fast and probably hand him a ticket. He had his logbook and all of his paperwork, hoping that the officer would be kind. When nobody came forward to his cab, he began walking back towards the police car. When he was at the rear of his trailer, he froze. There was nothing back there. He realized that the flashing light had been visible right up until he reached the rear of the trailer. It just blinked off. The driver looked at the grass on the side of the road. Nothing. He looked up and down the road, but he didn't see the law enforcement vehicle anywhere. It was a long, straight stretch of road with no place a unit could have gotten to hide. And why would a deputy or a trooper pull him over only to drive away and hide? The driver slowly walked back to his cab. Once behind the wheel, he glanced back to be sure he was not being stopped by whatever that thing was. Nothing there. The driver got going again. Then he called for any other truck drivers in the area just to see if they might have seen him getting pulled over. Well, there were no responses. A truck driver was going through the mountains of Colorado, heading north towards Pueblo. He was going over mountains, and it was dark, so he was all eyes, looking for any hazards. Going up a steep grade, his speed dropped down to about 40 as he made the top. On the side of the road sat an 18-wheeler. It looked like the driver had decided to take a quick break. Nothing weird. See it all the time. The driver kept going, now heading downhill. In a situation like this, you don't use the brakes. You let the engine control your speed. Stepping on the brakes will cause friction, which can lead to a fire. The truck that had been sitting on the side of the road suddenly went flying by. The brake lights were lit up as it passed. Smoke was coming from the rear of the trailer, followed by flames. The driver grabbed his two-way and he called the passing truck to tell him his trailer was on fire. A voice came back, calm, steady. All it said was, "I know." The flaming trailer vanished around the next curve in the mountain. The driver kept going downhill, keeping his speed down. He fully expected to find a flaming 18-wheeler on the side of the road. Had it been on its side burning away, he would not have been surprised. There was no truck crash anywhere. The driver got to the bottom of the mountain, but saw no sign of the flaming truck, no sign of a broken-down vehicle, no sign of anything. He listened intently to the radio, trying to find any reports of a truck catching fire or crashing or even being pulled over. No one said anything about a truck being on fire or crashing anywhere within miles of where he was. A truck driver was traveling through Tennessee on I-65 south near the Kentucky line. He was pulling a flatbed trailer with tarps covering his load. It was late at night and there wasn't much traffic. A quick look in the side mirror showed that the tarp was loose and it was flapping at the rear of the trailer. He looked for a place to pull off and fix his tarp. Ahead was an off-ramp. The driver took the ramp and he stopped about halfway between the interstate and the crossroad. As he was slowing down, 3 deer bolted from the trees on the side of the road, running right in front of him. Had he not been slowing to stop, he would have hit one, if not all 3. The driver got out, walked to the rear of the trailer, and began adjusting the tarp and fixing the bungee cords that held them in place. As he was working, a rock came flying from the dark and hit the trailer right next to him. He spun around, looking for his would-be assailant. There was no one there. After scanning the trees, the driver got back to work. With his back to the trees, he heard the sound of a limb breaking, a very big limb. Once more he looked at the trees, trying to see what was there. Maybe it was a bear or some other wild animal, but he saw nothing. With the tarp now fixed, the driver walked around on top of the trailer to check the rest of his load. He kept glancing back at the trees. There was a huge creature now standing just outside the tree line. It was 7 or 8 feet tall and covered in hair. The driver stared at the creature, which was staring back at him. He heard the sound of a low, vicious growl coming from the beast. The driver was on top of the trailer looking down. The thing just stood there watching. The driver took a tentative step towards the tractor. This was followed by a few more. As he was getting close to the driver's door, the creature let out with a cross between a scream and howl. It was so loud that the driver could feel the vibration in his chest. The yell got him running. The driver dove into his truck and got going as fast as his truck could from a dead stop heading uphill. He pulled through the stop sign at the top of the hill, shot across the crossroad, and flew down the on-ramp back onto I-65. There are things seen on the sides of roads that make just about everyone uneasy. One common sighting is a black dog. This isn't any ordinary dog, but a huge unknown type with glowing red eyes. Truck drivers have seen this beast all over the world. The sightings usually happen in the middle of nowhere. The driver is almost on the verge of falling asleep. The thing I see when very tired is a giant black cat. I found out my dad used to see the same thing. If we were on a trip late at night, he would see giant cats up in trees on the sides of the road. It would startle him, causing an adrenaline dump that would keep him awake for quite some time after that. It wasn't until I was about 50 that he told me about his sightings. He said it happened a lot when driving around midnight or early hours of the morning. The black dog is considered to be a warning of bad things to come if the driver doesn't stop and get some rest. Others believe the black dog is more like some kind of a reaper, there to confiscate the souls of any drivers who fail to stop before it's too late. Highway 666 is considered to be one of the most haunted stretches of road in the U.S. It runs from Monticello, Utah to Gallup, New Mexico, about 200 miles. It is mostly flat terrain with cactus and scrub on both sides of the road. There are mountains in the distance to look at while you're traveling, but they're only visible in the daytime. Throughout the history of the highway, each and every accident and death was reflected as a situation that occurred because of the evil that was rumored to reside on and around this stretch of road. Just east of Laredo is Banquet, Texas. If you drive north from Banquet to San Patricio, you will be driving on FM 666. I haven't found an overabundance of accidents or deaths on this stretch of road, so I would say there is something else, something unexplained going on out west. Yes, I have taken FM 666 several times. I went to San Patricio to look into some of their ghost stories. But that's another show. One of the most widespread stories of the haunted Highway 666 is the story that covers experiences involving an ominous black sedan that appears to be chasing individuals on long stretches of the road. Many folks have seen this black sedan while traveling on 666. Truck drivers prefer nighttime travel since it's cooler and there are fewer cars to deal with. When darkness falls on the desolate road, the witnesses have said they have seen headlights come up behind them, right on to the Mansfield bar. The following vehicle stays right on their back bumper, too close for comfort. In a bid to outrun the pursuing vehicle, the driver will speed up, going as fast as they can. The black car will stay right on their bumper the whole time. Other drivers have said they've decided to pull over to allow the black vehicle to pass. The car will zip by at a ridiculous speed, vanishing into the distance. If the driver does nothing and stays at the same speed for a while, the black car will vanish from sight, blinking out like it was never there. What's that? You don't know what the Mansfield bar is? June 28th, 1967, actress Jane Mansfield, her driver, her lawyer, and 3 of her kids were traveling to New Orleans for an interview after an appearance in Mississippi. While cruising along the highway at 2 o'clock in the morning, the driver didn't see a semi-truck that had slowed down because of a mosquito fogging truck ahead of it. Mansfield's driver couldn't react in time, and the 1966 Buick Electra 225 slid under the semi-trailer, and Mansfield and both of the adults were decapitated by the truck's rear bumper. To keep this from ever happening again, the safety board required all trucks to have a rear bumper that was lowered down towards the ground. This law of the rear bar, try that again, this low rear bar is called a Mansfield bar. Several drivers on 666 have reported seeing a pack of black dogs standing on the side of the road as they passed. These hounds are known as hellhounds. Nobody knows if the black dog being seen in other parts of the world is a relative or some other kind of a bizarre entity. Most of the witnesses said the dogs just stood there watching them go by. Others have had the dogs begin chasing their trucks. The drivers said even while traveling at 60 or 70 miles an hour, the dogs would stay with them, running along the dirt on the side of the road. At their own discretion, at some time, the dogs would stop their pursuit and vanish from sight. These hounds are believed to be responsible for numerous traffic accidents that have occurred on the road and the deaths of those that have lost their lives on this haunted roadway. Many have expressed fear that these seemingly supernatural beasts have the power to literally shred tires with their razor-sharp teeth. Folks driving along this highway keep their windows up to keep the hellhounds from jumping in through an open window. Picture this. You're all alone driving along a dark road when suddenly you're no longer alone. Someone or something is now sitting in the passenger seat. This has happened along 666 to many folks. It's one thing to have a phantom hitchhiker that you choose to pick up. It's a whole different thing to have something invade your vehicle. Those who have discovered this intruder have either looked over to see who is there, or they've tried to ignore this thing next to them, hoping it will soon go away. The drivers who have looked said the image was indistinct, hard to see in the dim light of the cab. It looked human while giving off an air of something far from human. The folks who ignored the thing next to them said after a few miles it was just no longer there, vanished without giving any indication of movement. Lots of folks who travel 666 that were not in big rigs have had an encounter with a phantom 18-wheeler. The witnesses would experience vehicle trouble. Either the engine would simply quit or they would have a flat tire. Pulling over to the side of the road, the driver would get out to assess the problem. An 18-wheeler would come flying by in either direction, missing the broken-down vehicle by mere inches. The force of the wind coming off the truck would nearly push the driver off of his or her feet. It wasn't a truck that you would hear coming. The sound of its engine growing louder as it drew near. This truck would appear feet from the disabled vehicle and fly by. Many said they believed the truck actually hit them, which caused no damage, or they came close to being hit. They expressed the fact that the truck seemed to intentionally aim for them. It is believed that the spirit that controls this semi-truck is angry and despises anything that contains life. There is one spirit that does not seem to be so hostile. This spirit is believed to be that of a young girl that is typically seen standing on the side of the road wearing a white gown. While there are no reported cases where this ghost seems dangerous, individuals claim she seems unusual. She is said to have a sad, unnerving expression that prompts the concern of any individual that spots this spirit. When people approach her, it is said she literally disappears. People wonder why so many ghosts are seen wearing all white. Well, there are a lot of ghosts seen wearing other colored clothing. It could be in the spirit world they simply lose the color, or maybe it's just that white stands out so well in the dark that they're only noticing the ones in white. There are many legends that are part of Native American culture. One such legend that the Indians have is about a group of people that have the ability to transition into various types of animals. These people are typically referred to as being skinwalkers. This act is often referred to by those that study anthropology as shape-shifting. It is believed that a medicine man who wants to become more powerful, rejecting their duties as a healer, as a wise person, becomes skinwalkers. Many claim that the spirits of these skinwalkers exist today on Highway 666. It is believed that they are able to immediately transform into an assortment of animals along the highway and will appear suddenly in front of oncoming traffic. As a result, the vehicle would instantaneously become involved in a potentially fatal accident. You would see someone standing in the middle of the road right in front of your vehicle, so it's almost natural that you're going to turn the wheel to try not killing this person. This would lead to a vehicle accident. However, those that did not swerve said the person just simply went right through their vehicle without even slowing them down or making a sound. A few drivers have reported seeing a man standing on the side of the road. As they're just about to pass, he turns into a huge wolf or a coyote. The beast began running along next to the truck, keeping pace with it even at 60 or 70 miles an hour. This creature is said to be a skinwalker. The creature will suddenly just vanish from sight. Way back when I saw that weird creature under the railroad bridge on I-35, I was convinced it was the rake. Nowadays, I think it was something else. Maybe a skinwalker, or even a wendigo. It was way too skinny to be any kind of a normal animal. I still slow down and watch the embankment to see if it'll show up again. And I'm not the only one that's seen this thing. Many drivers who start down the ominous 666 have disappeared without a trace. In some cases, a vehicle or sometimes a part of the person's property have been located, but in other cases there's no trace or any evidence that indicates that the individual had ever even been on the road at all. Many that have disappeared from extremely long periods of time have reappeared with no explanation several hours or even days later. These folks typically have no concept of time and have not felt as if they've been away very long, almost like the UFO abduction cases. In many instances, they have no recollection of the events that had previously transpired. Then there are many that have traveled down the highway and have discovered that they took longer than expected. What should have been a couple-hour trip turns into 6, 7, maybe even 8 hours. When the United States renamed the road U.S. Route 491, the statistics associated with accidents and deaths was drastically reduced. Why would renaming a road cause such a dramatic reduction in bizarre incidents? My theory is that as folks are driving along and they see a roadside saying they are traveling on 666, it triggers something in their mind that is an attractor for nasty things. They become subconsciously alert to experiencing something, and all that energy attracts things to them. Many say the fact that individuals no longer experience the psychological fear that something will happen to them while traveling down the highway. Others say there is a psychological predisposition for people to expect to encounter bad things because of the number. I'm not just flapping my gums. When we do ghost investigations, we ask any guests if they're afraid. Anyone admitting to being uneasy will be placed on the front of our group. The energy being given off in the form of fear will draw spirits to us. The idea is, spirits don't eat food, so they can't create energy of their own. In order to manifest themselves or to do things like open and close doors or make sounds, they have to get that energy from somewhere. Either they'll suck the batteries dry in your camera, or they'll feed on fear coming off of people. Not seeing signs every so often reminding you that you're driving on a possibly paranormal road may alleviate some of the tension, damping down this energy. I haven't been out to this area yet, so right now I'm just going by what I've read and what I can come up with on my own. A driver was hauling a load along an unnamed road one night. He was past due for some sleep, and he was looking for a truck stop or a rest area. Up ahead, he spotted a building with a huge parking lot. There were no lights anywhere, and he pulled in. He noticed the building was closed and all the windows were boarded up. Oh well, a place to stop for a few hours. He pulled up right next to the building. It was a quiet night, and he was asleep as soon as he stretched out in the sleeper. The next morning, the driver woke and stepped out into the cab area. Glancing in a side mirror, he saw a highway patrol vehicle was behind him with its lights going. The driver jumped down from his tractor, taking note of the fact he was no longer parked in a parking lot. The building was gone as well. His truck was sitting on the side of the highway, and he was now 20 miles from where he had stopped. Walking back to the trooper, he was told that they thought the truck was being hijacked. The driver said he was in the sleeper all night, and when he woke up, the doors were all locked. After proving to the troopers he was okay and the truck was his and he wasn't stealing it, the driver was allowed to continue on his way. He still wonders how he got 20 miles down the road while asleep in the back of his truck. A driver had just picked up his new tractor, and new for him, and he was going to deadhead, that is, driving the tractor without a trailer, or a trailer without a load, to pick up a load. He invited his girlfriend to go along with him. They got started late in the afternoon, and they drove to within a few miles of the town where the load was to be picked up that morning. There were no truck stops or rest areas to park in, so the driver found an open field off the side of the road, pulled in and parked. They went to bed in the sleeper so they would be ready for a long trip in the morning. In the middle of the night, they were woken by the truck being rocked back and forth. It sounded like someone was pounding on the sides. Thinking maybe the owner of the land had come along and didn't want anyone trespassing, the couple stepped outside to answer for their indiscretions. There was nobody anywhere around them. In the distance, they thought they heard voices, followed by yelling. The yelling turned to screams. Some were in anger, while others sounded as if the person was in terrible pain. It was pitch black, and the flashlight the driver carried didn't pick up anything but the fog and a few trees. The sounds of screams and what sounded like fighting got to be too much for them, and the couple ran to the truck and jumped in. Firing up the tractor, the driver turned on the headlights. They could see men in uniform running in front of the truck. Their uniforms looked like they were from the Civil War. The men were carrying muzzle-loading rifles. Well, the driver put it in gear and he got the heck out of there as fast as he could. As they were putting a few miles between them and the battle, the couple began to try to explain away what had happened as being just a hallucination or maybe a shared dream of some kind. It was all just too unreal. They got to the yard where the load was waiting. Getting out of the truck, they both noticed the sides of the truck were smeared with handprints. Most were made from mud, but a few looked like they were with bloody hands. It turned out that they had parked in a field where 156 years earlier there had been a small but bloody battle fought during the Civil War. A truck driver was heading to Melbourne, Australia, and he was feeling the need for sleep. There was a wide spot next to the road, so he pulled over. The driver checked the doors to be sure they were locked and hit the hay. The driver was awoken by the sound of the passenger door opening, and the overhead light came on. He didn't have much of a weapon, just a metal bar used to check tire pressure. He clutched it and prepared himself to fight off any possible attacker. His focus was on the curtain between the sleeper and the cab. The curtain remained still. After waiting for his heart to settle down, the driver asked, "Who was there?" No response. He carefully pulled the curtain aside and looked. There was nobody in the truck. He jumped down from the cab and looked around. There were no vehicles anywhere. He walked back and forth to make sure nobody was hiding under the trailer. Finally, he got back in to try to catch up with his dreams. The sun was up and it was time to hit the road, so the driver got ready to go. Looking out the side window, the driver was startled to see he was sitting right next to an old cemetery. He decided he had been visited by some ghost looking for a ride away from this graveyard. In India, truck drivers on the Delhi-Jaipur highway have seen some weird things. The highway is said to be haunted by spirits from the Bangar fort. A Princess Ratnavati was considered to be the best-looking woman in all of India. This led to lots of royal folks trying to win her hand in marriage. One day, while shopping in town, she was spotted by a man who practiced black magic, Sindhu Sevada. He wanted her as his own. The princess was looking at bottles of perfume, so Sevada created a bottle filled with a magic potion that would cause the princess to fall in love with him. The princess discovered his plans, and she threw a rock at the bottle, breaking it. The rock, which was splashed with this magic potion, became empowered, and it began chasing Sevada. It hit him in the head causing the black magician to fall to the ground. As he lay there dying, he cursed the land all around him. This had led to the area around the fort being overrun by ghosts and spirits. With so much magic and paranormal activity around the fort, villagers have opted to move to as far from it as they could. The folks that need to get from one point to another would try to avoid this area, but truck drivers and people living in the area have little to no choice. They have seen a woman in a red sari standing right in front of them. As they're about to run the woman down, she vanishes. It turns out a woman had been killed in a very nasty car accident years ago, and her spirit is now trapped in the area where she died. The most common sights are of female ghosts. This makes me think that the magician, Sevada, has been using his power from beyond the grave to trap the spirits of women who die in the area. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Share what you've heard with everyone. Let folks know what they're missing. If you'd like to contact me, you can do so at strangethings@arkanasa.com. And Arturo and Maggie, I hope you're able to get some sleep at night in those truck stops. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murdered 3. Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?